Hello, hello. It's so nice to see so many of you here. Today, we're going to have a discussion panel. Here are my marvelous guests. But before I tell you who they are, hopefully you know some of them already, I'd like to tell you the backstory of this event. There are a few accessibility conferences in Poland, and at one of them, we had a really nice after party where all the accessibility specialists sat together, and, wined and dined and complained that we have so many questions, but no answers. We're at the level where we don't quite have anyone to ask. And I was one of those people. And we thought that we'd love to listen to a real debate where smart people tell us how we should implement accessibility into our organizations. Because obviously, with the European Accessibility Act, with tons of other legislation, everyone is treating accessibility more and more seriously lately. But it doesn't work. For some reason, in our organizations, it usually doesn't really work very well. And hopefully, my panelists will help me answer all of my questions. I hope you'll find some value in these questions as well. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to, first, to my left, Górny. David is the Chief Accessibility Officer at Access. Access is one of the few accessibility companies in Poland which actually work, because everyone tries to earn on accessibility right now, but not everyone does it well. So here's a good source. Second person, we have Statkiewicz. And Robert is an accessibility expert, but additionally UX researcher. And he's very much into inclusive design and participatory research. And last but not least, someone I probably don't need to introduce, Kutyła. Independent accessibility consultant with his own company currently, and author of one of the few accessibility-related books on the market. Okay, so a great applause for all of our great panelists. And hopefully, off we go. Okay, so my first question to all of you is, well, we'll start perhaps with Wojtek. Tell me, why doesn't implementing accessibility in the organization work? What are the issues?
Hey. First of all, we should say that while you can probably hear us very well, I can barely hear what Dorota is saying here, so some of this will be a complete freestyle, which is excellent. I love it. So I think the main issue with implementing accessibility in organizations is that most organizations, at least that I know of, do not really understand the benefits of doing it, and also usually think that they do not have enough resource or knowledge to implement it, so therefore there's a certain level of fear that's arising amongst the staff and the management. And in many ways it's actually true, because doing accessibility right does require some effort. But the hardest is to change our habits and to do things that we weren't doing, especially if we are very solid in our understanding of things we were doing right are right. The thing here is that it's worth remembering that good accessibility is at the core of everything that happens in the web. And even if we just talk about the semantic HTML, which is like the root of that tree, then we'll quickly realize that there's just no other option than to become interested in accessibility if our products are to have a long and fulfilling lifespan. But yeah, the issues are multifold, most related to awareness, lack of budget, the pressure from the regulators as well at the same time, and the lack of necessary skills. At least that's my observation. I don't know what Robert would say about that, but I'm curious to hear.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I also don't know how the mic works here. So that's actually a very good point, Wojtek, and I think I agree with many of things you said. I think it also really depends on the size of the organization and context each organization works. The things you mentioned, like for example, we just don't realize how accessibility may be actually very useful and helpful for us, our businesses, is like one thing. Another is that actually a lot of people just don't know kind of where to start. In our case, in Roche, for example, it wasn't like, the challenge wasn't like to say to people that, hey, accessibility is important. Like, everyone knew that and agreed with that. Yes, it's like important, but especially in big organization, I don't know if you know how it is, but basically everyone says such things, but later there is no action behind it, right? It starts to be like a chain of emails. Hey, we should do that. Yeah, it's great, it's great, it's great. And then it's just like dissolved. So another thing that normally helps is like any kind of, I would say, pressure, or actually like a very visible statement that, yes, this is something we should care and do about it. And normally then I see that people really start to not only talk about it, but actually asking questions, okay, what we should do, where we should go next. So this is at least my observation I had here.
Okay, so according to Wojtek, accessibility should be at the core of the problem of every project, and one of the main issues is budget. Robert says that, on the other hand, in large organizations, people do have some awareness of the problem, but they aren't really ready to perform any meaningful action. And David, what do you think from your experience with the companies you help to consult?
Okay. From my perspective, we work for many companies and public institutions, and I believe that there is lack of knowledge how valuable is accessibility inside. Some people know what to do, but only in their area. They don't have strategy, and also leaders and managers don't give them enough budget for implementing accessibility. So these reasons are, in my opinion, the most important, because even if there is ambassador of accessibility or a few people who take care of it, all organizations don't have enough knowledge and space to implement accessibility. Also, what is important, many organizations treat accessibility as a project, not as a process, but it is long-term activity, so that's why it doesn't work. And I am a blind person, so believe me, in most of companies and organizations, it is an issue, yeah.
Could I add something to that, please? Because you pointed at something very interesting, and it's to do with budgeting. Very frequently, it's hard to budget accessibility in, because if an organization doesn't have any prior knowledge of it, and if it's being seen as something quite scary, then how can we budget for it? Like, how can you scope out how much time something's gonna take you if you've never experienced it before or seen it before, right? So that's additional aspect that very often gets in the way, and of course accessibility tends to be under budgeted quite heavily. I see it a lot in my work of a consultant, where the initial sort of imagined estimation of budgeting actually is nowhere near enough to what should be budgeted for in order for making accessibility a part of the life cycle. So this is again a challenge stemming from the lack of understanding, really. So again, back to basics, education and widespread awareness of the thing should really help in addressing that issue as well.
Okay, so I have another question for you. I'll start with David this time. David, are the problems that somehow don't let us have accessibility in our organizations, are these difficulties different for small and large companies, public and private?
In general, of course, the size of institution or organization is important, because if the organization is big, they have more software, more applications, many spaces to take care of it, and they need more resources. Smaller organization, of course, they don't have as big problems, and maybe they don't need a so big strategy to deal with it. But generally, accessibility is quite similar in public, in business. Actually, the same standards, the same issues, maybe a little different products and services, but generally, accessibility is very, very similar, yeah.
Wojtek, how would you respond?
I would add to this that, in my observation, one of the biggest issues or things that differentiate big companies from small companies is obviously the decision chain. So in a small company, it's easier to take a well-informed decision because there's less people in the queue waiting for it to happen. But also the knowledge and skills, they dissipate differently in big and small organizations. So in small organizations, you know, if you have 4 or 5 people company, you send 2 of them to a training, you work with all of them maybe for a while, and then suddenly they start actually using these skills and new knowledge, and it kind of goes organically. In much larger organizations, especially where the only team that sort of is interested in accessibility at the first place is, let's say, the UX team, knowledge dissipates very differently. So you might have a very uneven spread where some people have quite skilled after a short while, and then you have the rest of the company who doesn't care or is not skilled enough, or actually they don't even know that there's an accessibility initiative going on. And that poses a huge issue, and that scales up. So the bigger the company, more of these issues you will see. So that is a challenge actually to overcome. That's why the traditional way of working with accessibility, where there's a specialist coming and there's auditing something and saying, hey, this is the audit, nothing works, and sayonara, have good time fixing it. It just doesn't work anymore. You have to kind of work with the team and across multiple teams very often, and that's not something that everyone can do, but that's the only way that we can ensure that the actual spread of knowledge and skills happens at the right time, with the right pace, and just in the right way. So I see this as one of the biggest challenges that companies face, certainly. That's my 5P. Thank you.
Is there a type of organization you like to work with most?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, is there a type of organization?
Yeah, a type of organization that I like working most
you
with.
like to work with most?
It's not to do with the type, really. I mean, other than, of course, bullshit organizations or organizations that cause harm to people. Like, I don't work with those, and there's lots of them. But it's mostly to do with the willingness to do things and their interest in the subject. Not even much so, you know, the budgets, because that can work often, but it's to do with whether people really want to make a change or whether they do it because they just want to be legal. I mean, I also want to be legal when I drive a car, fine, but you know, when I drive a car, it's just on me. I'm not really proactively helping others, maybe, you know, but when you're building a digital product, you have responsibility that scales beyond that. You actually are impacting people's lives, because like what is super easy for me may not be at all easy for somebody else. So we have that responsibility, we have to think about it every day. And if I find a company, or if a company finds me, because most often that's how it works, and they express these values in their work, and I can see that and I can recognize that, then I think we are a good match and often we work together. But yeah, there's that other type where, you know, it's mostly to do with box checking exercise, and I'm not interested in that.
If I can add something to that, also, like, because we're now talking about the smaller and bigger organizations, but I think another type is like enterprise, right? And really often, even like back 2 or 1 year ago, I believe, there was like this postulate that, for example, you know, the mainstream tools and processes we know doesn't actually work well in enterprise, right? So even 2 years ago, we've been talking about that instead of like mainstream UX, we kind of need like enterprise UX that's gonna be like, you know, fitted for the challenges we have in the enterprises. And some of those, I think, are matching really nicely with what you said, Wojtek. But for example, I believe in our case at least, I don't know, like in other big worldwide organizations, the problem is that really often, there is like a lot of teams that do the similar thing or fight for the same, but they are not communicated. So that really often also leads to emerging of like different standards across the organization, and each of them is like intended to be universal. But in the end, it doesn't really works well. And normally those teams just start like realizing that there is like another team when they're like quite developed already or like advanced, right? So in our case, it's really hard to communicate internally about the things we should do externally, for example, right? And really often what we see, because we are also working with the vendors that help us with implementing accessibility, but we just see that, you know, like some tools that they know are available and really often comes like from this personal experience of being accessibility evaluator or accessibility expert in a smaller organization or like for government, do not exactly work here, just because it's really hard to imagine for those people how our reality works too. I've tried to like highlight that during my yesterday presentation, but this reality is like really messy. And it's sometimes it's just so hard to navigate. So I also understand if someone is like an outsider, it can help you to, you know, better understand your situation, how you are perceived from the outside. But it's problem for that person to how to navigate inside the organization, right? So there should be always like this cooperation, I would say, in terms of enterprise, especially when you need to like fit some tools for your own needs.
Great. Now, we're going to touch a little more on methods for implementing accessibility in a minute, but there was something that Wojtek said that stuck with me. You said that compliance isn't everything, and Robert, yesterday during his lecture, said that accessibility is not a checklist. So, what actually is the accessibility we are trying to implement? What is it? Robert, you first.
Yeah, so again, I think this motto, like accessibility is not a checklist, echoed here several times during the conference. But I think we need, and actually everyone should work on the second part of the sentence for your own organization. If it's not a checkbox, what it is? I believe it's a commitment to create and actually care and give all the people or the people who are in scope and your context of what you are doing for agency and doing things. Like yesterday, I've tried also to present how differently we can think about accessibility, right? It's not only that you need to be compliant for some universal standards that are maybe arised in your country or legislation, but you should also think about agency of your users, your customers, or whoever else you work for, so they could be like heard, welcomed, and have like this feeling that they have agency over what they are doing or try to achieve with your products.
Okay, so now back to David. As a special needs user and accessibility consultant, do you think we should go towards compliance? You know, everything according to WCAG is done, and we don't care about empathy and stuff? Or somehow in other methods, inclusive design, universal design, what do you think?
Yes, of course, formal accessibility is not enough, and yes, I say it loudly. If organizations don't understand the value of accessibility, don't understand that checklist is not enough, all people should understand what is WCAG, how to implement it, and in the end, there are people behind the standard. It will never happen well. I saw a lot of web pages or application where accessibility was embedded, but it was so formal that for me it was actually unuseful or not well used, at least. So if there is understanding behind the standard and people think about other people with disabilities, with other needs, and they know what they need and how it should work, it will be much better. Yeah, and I'm really, I really recommend this kind of doing things, yeah, in this field.
Okay, this seems to lead us to the concept that formal accessibility is not enough. We should see the human being behind the accessibility, which sort of sounds like empathy and user experience. Wojtek, what do you think about empathy?
I think that empathy is a concept that's heavily overused because we talk about empathy, but we don't give a shit. So I'm sorry, but if empathy is not followed by action, then it's not worth anything, and we can just hide it into our pocket. So that's first thing. But it might be controversial, however, that's my observation. I've heard so many times about companies having empathy for their customers, but producing completely useless pieces of garbage that were neither accessible nor usable. So I'm really sorry. It just doesn't work this way. But coming back to the original subject, I think accessibility for me is two things. First of all, it's that fundamental understanding that different people have different needs, and if we don't care for those needs, then we don't care about our clients. And that's why it's quite hard for me to understand why in 2025 we have so many organizations that simply ignore the market need of their customers, thinking that their customers don't need accessibility. It's simply a false thinking. I don't know why we still have that. The other thing, which is sort of related to that, is accessibility is a craft. Accessibility is like doing things right, right? So imagine that you are, let's say, a cook at a restaurant, a chef, and somebody orders a lasagna. And you are panicking a bit because you don't have lasagna on the menu, but they really want lasagna. They just like have a craving for it, right? And you really want to give them that lasagna. So you ask one of your colleagues, you know, to run to the store nearby and to buy a frozen lasagna. Then you defrost and serve to your customer. That's not going to really end well, does it? But if you know how to make lasagna, maybe you won't serve that one customer, or you give them the frozen one in the meantime, but then you'll start making lasagna from scratch and you will save your customers better. And then you have more customers coming for that delicious lasagna that you're making. So I just wonder, you know, where did we get it wrong in terms of educating developers, UX designers over the years, not explaining to them that some of the things that are related to accessibility, like web standards, like, you know, rules of good design, that they actually are the fundamentals that they should build upon. That's the thing that always baffles me. It's, again, one more analogy before I'll give voice to somebody else. It's like with driving a car. You know, we as designers imagine that we are just all drivers, perhaps most of us are. It's one thing to drive a car, just, you know, sit in a car and press the pedals and go back and forth and whatever. And it's the other thing to understand just a little bit about how the car works. So you can be smarter in your choices of when to accelerate, when to stop, how to save fuel, you know, how to indicate right, how to overtake right, and all these things, which can make you a very careful driver, and that's obviously better for everyone, including yourself, your fuel economy, and other drivers on the road. And that's how I look at accessibility. So at some level, accessibility is a checklist. There is a series of rules to follow. Of course there is, you know, and we could checklist it all. But I think the trick here is not in thinking about it as a checklist, but having an intention to do things right. And then using some checklists to go through work. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I use checklists all the time that I made for myself. I need them because they structure my work. But if they become my work, then that's where things get wrong, because I will be just following blind orders, not understanding what I'm doing, and that's dangerous.
Okay, so to answer the question finally, currently the most prevalent approach to implementing accessibility seems to be choosing universal design. But is that good? What team are all of you on? I'll ask each one of you. David, universal design or inclusive design?
In my opinion, both. Universal design because all people need accessibility, and in my opinion it is true. Inclusive design because we should think about the people who has bigger barriers, and we should understand how they actually how look like their everyday life and work. And I think that professionalism is not empathy, it's just knowledge, and we should test all of this application, the web pages, with the people with disabilities, with people with special needs, of course with technical testers too, because standard, in my opinion, is very important because it gives us technical instruction how to implement accessibility. But in the end, the people who really need accessibility and have the biggest barriers should test it and should check if it works. Yeah, it's very important.
Robert?
So I would say both, but actually, as you may know, I am also like a big advocate on inclusive design because it's actually changed our understanding what accessibility really is. And actually it helps us adjust that definition for your own context, right? I agree with what you said, David, but also inclusive design, first of all, universal design also help us to be compliant and avoid some, basic legal challenges that might face our organization. But inclusive research or inclusive design help us to go forward and make the things even more adjusted for ourselves. Like just in case from Roche, for example, we do follow the compliance list that we have from WCAG, but there are like specific contexts we're working with. So for example, we are making application that's gonna be used primarily by the people who are undergoing chemotherapy, right? And really often they're just like tired for some time. And the thing that it's not listed in the requirements, but can be actually very useful from their perspective is well-designed dark mode actually, right? But if we want actually have and do that exercise to maybe not trying to be like empathetic, because I think we also like maybe overusing that word, but also not understanding it correctly, because empathy, it's not about like being nice. It's like about understanding the different perspective than yours. And we kind of have like tools to go out from our perspective, right? But I think going back to the point about the universal and inclusive design, another thing is that it helps to better understand your own context. We just discussed about that, for example. It's, for example, in some countries around the world, people can or has to be forced to have X in their passport as a gender marker, for example, right? Therefore, there is like very little companies worldwide that recognize that. And just last year, Ryanair was charged for that, and no one was actually knowing it may come, right? But actually, that was like one of important, I would say, cases for them, because they care about passengers who hold passports, and those passports are very different around the world. And there are also like different laws that would apply to that, right? So although there wasn't like any, like strict requirement you have to have that, they haven't thought about that in advance, and they could. And they haven't avoided like this financial charge that really often is something that scares companies, let's say, and motivates them to do something. So again, I think both, but inclusive design is really like the method that would us better set accessibility in our own context.
Okay, and Wojtek, inclusive or universal?
I think it's important for us to care about everyone's needs, really, and whether we call it universal design, inclusive design, or something else, I'm not so much worried about that. I think in the best scenarios that I've ever seen in implementations where accessibility works for organizations, there's a tendency to talk about customer needs, there's a tendency to talk about knowing your customers and then implementing some well-known design methods or techniques and extending them to what the company might need depending on their context. And those terms of inclusive design or universal design or anything else, they sort of disappear, just being replaced by an everyday care and the duty of care. And that's how I like to think about that. I think that for a long time we've been stuck, and we are stuck in that sometimes still, in kind of talking about labels, applying rigid frameworks to context that might maybe require a slightly different, more elastic approach. But once we overcome that, I think then that's where the magic happens. You know, when people get together with the notion of like, hey, we really want to change the quality of service for our customers, that's when the real magic happens. So yeah, I wouldn't say this or the other. To me, they are at times the same thing. To me, they are at times I don't really think about. In fact, I don't think about them at all, to be honest. I just believe that, you know, if you know your customers and if you have the methods of making their life easier, then you are doing design, and design is what you want to do, so do it well.
Okay, so for all you listeners, to sum this part up, because we're going to go into strategies now, if you're standing with the choice of going inclusive or universal, David tells us both have pros and cons. Robert tells us, well, both are useful, but his heart lies with inclusive. And Wojtek says, whatever, just do it. So you see, this all depends on your organization. And this is what we're going to talk about now. Because, guys, organizations use various strategies to implement accessibility and other stuff as well. The most common ones are top-down strategies, where you start with procedures, policies, and implement that. And there are people who say that a bottom-up strategy is better. So a strategy which is bottom-up would be one which starts with education, seminars, empathy, which we know is overused now, and tries to work up to formal accessibility. I'll start with David, then Wojtek, and then Robert. Which approach do you think is better, and for what kind of organization?
Yeah, again, both. Strategy from the top and strategy from the bottom in the same time is, in my opinion, the best, because from the top we need strategy approach, budget and workspace for doing it, and we should train people. They should understand what they are doing and what is the value. And when it's from the bottom, it's also important because the people who have the knowledge, who wants to learn, who wants to know what exactly is accessibility and how valuable it is, it's a treasure, yeah, for a company. And I believe that these people are very important. But if they change the job, sometimes this approach is missing, yeah, it disappeared, and actually accessibility disappeared in companies. So top is also important. For bigger companies, of course, both will be optimum. For smaller, maybe it's enough if there is one person who is accessibility coordinator or a specialist who take care of these resources, because it's just a few. I work with NGOs where work, for example, 3 people, and they have a lot of work, so one person is enough to deal with everything. In bigger companies, it should be more people, more resources, because of the scale, yeah.
And David, what about public sector companies?
In public sector, especially in Poland, because I have experience from this field, I see that it is better, but if we think about accessibility, which is obliged for 6 years actually, change really a little. So we have the strategy from the top, yeah, we have the law, we have managers who should take care I don't know if they really take care of it. We have ambassadors. There are many people who want to implement accessibility, but not not many things change in real. And for example, we test one system where we saw, oh, there is embedded accessibility, but in one moment in the procedure was the issue, and I was not able to go further. Yeah, so it was really big problem. So we advise them to test it, and to test it long term. Yeah, so it was very important. So I don't know if strategical way is good in this example, but yeah, this process, it's not a project, and we should think about it all the time.
Okay, now Wojtek, because Robert, I know you have a very interesting insight, and I'd like you to sum up everything.
Yeah, sure.
Wojtek.
So top or bottom, it's like having a shower, right? When you have a shower, think about which part you wash first. And I mean, I don't know, but like with accessibility, very often the job starts in the middle, not in the top and not on the bottom, you know? Because I think accessibility in an organization usually starts with an initiative. And in my experience, that initiative might be coming from the top, but really is delegated towards the middle. So it might be a middle manager, a design lead, or somebody like a, you know, VC of design even, or whatever, but still a middle kind of person coming and starting to chat about this. And then of course, after we, you know, see what's not working, you know, and kind of coming up with the plan, it then usually starts with some education and training and auditing and all these other things in the kind of bottom part, at the floor where everything happens, where the work is actually being done, but is periodically sort of reflected on the upper tier of the management, or maybe kind of middle upper tier. So practically speaking, I think we say top on the bottom. In my observation, it's like a mix of these things, and a lot, just like David had said, depends on the size of organization as well, its type, its willingness to actually do that type of work. I wouldn't say that one approach is better than the other, but certainly there are times when, you know, helping out, I do have to kind of work on both ends of that. I have to be in the middle, literally between all these people, and kind of push sometimes for the attention from the top, so more of their attention is given to the actual process, and then kind of stimulate the bottom, so people who work on the floor, to actually kind of carry on that accessibility virus over to the rest of the company, you know? So no, I wouldn't say that it's one or the other. Again, it's just a smart combination, and a lot depends on the context, and I'm very proud that I have used the term "it depends" for the first time, because we just have to say it. It's UX, so it depends, yeah?
So I would echo with that probably. I can just now share more information, for example, how it looked like in our organization, and advocates for both approaches actually. First of all, just because I am sitting here and talking about my organization, which is Roche transforming, is thanks to a bottom-up approach of our colleague who was like lobbying for years, and he managed to do that, right? Like our CEO signed, you know, the pledge that we will become fully digitally accessible, right? But the problem was to actually spread that information in our organization. And there is, like, as you may know already, a lot of available tools and resources you can find that tell you what you should do, like from this very formal top-down approach. But actually we instead decided to also listen first to people in our organization, what we do there. And actually we found something quite surprising. So of course the number of people in our organization that had like any technical skills to provide accessibility in our products were also really often the most critical about our company becoming fully digitally accessible, right? And that was quite surprising for us that, people knowing how to do accessible things were against that vision. So we decided to deep dive or actually dive deeper into that, right? And we've seen that it really depends which side of a business or the corporate you're representing. And that was because really often those people were trying to implement accessibility in their projects, but they failed. And then someone from the top kind of started repeating what they were saying and doing something, but without the technical knowledge they were doing, right? So they really often heard, or actually they felt they're unheard, that their values, or in other words, knowledge they also know from the practice, is not heard. Their perspective about accessibility is not even considered. Another thing we actually found was that, again, people in our organization said that, it's absolutely the right direction for us to go, but it was hard to actually imagine for them that accessibility may be something that we need for our employees, right? And surprisingly, it was even said by the people who had disability on their own, because they assumed that because we are working in the IT world, everyone can adjust their workspace for their needs, for example, right? Which is not actually true for all the folks, because some of them just will quit after some time. So we also tried to done some tests about that. And what we've seen that if we go with this top-down kind of approach, with omitting knowledge of our colleagues, and we are making the trainings about how to apply WCAG on your product or VUCAC, everyone is saying, oh yeah, cool, but nothing happens, right? And a lot of teams just go into never-ending loop of, applying for external companies to do accessibility evaluations, and I believe it's not the point of the transformation in the organization, right? So we've tried another approach, less, let's say, top-down, but bottom-up, where actually we organize a hackathon-inspired accessibility training, where also we put the people at the front. We invited people who are representing our patients, but also our colleagues that represent different dimensions of accessibility. And we've been a little bit, okay, I'm not sure if it's gonna work, let's see. And we also try to, invite colleagues who, for example, work in our company. For example, in Poland, we have a colleague who speaks solely English. Nevertheless, all the systems she had to work was in Polish, right? So we also included her in that panel. But we also invited the person who normally works online, so no one really sees what's happening, below the screen. And actually, she was blind on one eye. She is also neuroatypical person, and she's also in the queer relationship. So she was also explaining, what accessibility barriers she met. We also have a person that was blind and also a wheelchair user. And actually, it really changed the perspective of the people, because they later had a chance to go in this library mode, let's say, or live to library mode, and talk with people. And actually, the first person they ever come to was this colleague that had to use Polish-only systems. And they kind of start realizing that the accessibility has different dimensions, and those aspects where we can disable someone are relevant, and they really start after that caring and implementing things in their projects, because also the challenges became more real for them. And also we haven't go into this path of, sorry for saying that, simulating what it is to be a person with disability. I am rather against that, and most scientific research is against that. It actually also doesn't really bring empathy to understanding the situation. What does it mean, for example, to be blind? Really often it just brings this, mindset that, oh, sucks to be you, but I'm happy I am not you, kind of, right? So it doesn't really bring understanding so much as we could expect here. So I would say those are stories that I haven't shared yesterday, where we see that actually appreciating our people we have in our company helps implementing also the accessibility in the projects, not only in the statements.
Okay, now we'll try to sum this up Because, the title of the panel discussion is Accessibility by Design, Tips and Tricks for Implementing Accessibility in the Organization. So, time for the tips and tricks, right? I'll start with Robert, because, you can sum up your story with some actionable tricks and tips on implementing accessibility in the organization. From your story, what would you recommend to someone who, in the audience, probably feels they are the lone accessibility enthusiast in their company, no help from above, no understanding from their coworkers, and how should they start?
Yeah, that's a hard question, actually. But I think it's really about understand your context for accessibility, right? Try to be very specific. What's gonna be accessibility challenge for your customers, for your users, that can be very reasonable for your upper stakeholders, right? In our case, really often, why it also took us so long to find an external vendor that we can cooperate was because it was really hard for them, first of all, to also adjust and be flexible, but also understand that, that case that, for example, if your web page or your, your e-commerce is accessible, the turn is 50% doesn't really work in our case because we don't have individual, customers, let's say, right? We are working with the governments, we are working with the labs, etc. We don't have individual customers always, right? People are rather kind of forced to use our applications instead of buying them. So those doesn't really work, but we also try to listen what barriers and opportunities might be in our own organization, and we crafted those cases for accessibility, how it may look like, right? The one of them, for example, was example that is very resonating with mine own, the business I'm representing, so pharmaceuticals. So pretty, I would say, known problem with the clinical trials, that they are basically built up from the same kind of people, and the pharmaceuticals in the end failed. And although it haven't really affected us, it affected how the people perceived health in the world, right? And since the 2016, when it comes out that many clinical trials are not diverse, the people kind of stop believing, I would say, in the health. So this is a big challenge for our company, and being accessible to recognize that would also promote the values we have. And that was, for example, our case for accessibility, and other ones that were also from our sector. So I would say, just to sum up, to really understand what opportunities you have in your organization, because in our case, it was also to find help in different departments and find those dependencies that we need to be mindful, but could also help us leverage. It was mostly the sustainable strategy we have, so it makes, let's say, enrouting accessibility much easier in our organization. But another big supporter for us was belonging and inclusion department that cares about well-being of our employees, and those two factors help us leverage our actions.
Okay, so those were the tips from Robert, and he represents a larger organization which has a pretty good structure of inclusivity already implemented. And now, you guys, first David with the more Polish perspective, and then Wojtek with your international perspective. So, David, tips and tricks, how to implement accessibility if you have nothing. For different types of organizations.
I'm laughing a little bit because tricks, I think about magic. Accessibility is not magical. I think it's a hard job. It should be professional, and in my opinion, the most important is knowledge. For the first step, I think that WCAG is a standard, but not just the criteria. Understanding WCAG is very important, and first step it should be this. I believe if organization train people is very important, and hold people in whole organization, because everybody should know his role in organization. Of course, the training will be different for developer, different for user designer, and different for manager, but everyone should know his role. What else? I noticed that even if accessibility is going to higher level, there is really big chance that it will go down. So keeping accessibility on a good level is very, very important. For example, I have many applications, and sometimes I can use for my bank account application, and it doesn't and it will work properly, but sometimes it is update, and one day, for example, I cannot pay my bills, yeah, and this is a really big issue. For me, actually, is a huge problem, because I have to ask someone to help me, and then I have to show how much money I have, for example. Not nice. So that's why I think that keeping accessibility on good level is very, very important. And when we start this adventure with accessibility, it should not be, I will say it once again, it should not be a project, it should be a process, and when we start, we should continue, and we should not go back, yeah, in this process.
Okay, and Wojtek, your international perspective from your clients, what tips and tricks do you give them?
Yeah, I also don't like the word tricks, because they assume that I do something and it's, you know, tricky, magical, and then off I go, I'm set. But it's a good question, and I think it's, you know, when I am faced with someone, when I see someone who's just trying to kind of make a difference in the organization and they're getting interested in accessibility, one of the first things that I often say is be prepared to fail. But remember that it's not your failure, it's the failure of your organization if it doesn't work. So you cannot lose, and I would like to emphasize this, like, you cannot lose anything on becoming interested in accessibility. Like, from the moment you get hooked up on it, from the moment you first read about anything, even super simple things like, I don't know, alternative text, or like little tiny things, you learn how to navigate a website with the keyboard, that's all maybe you'll do at the beginning. You have gained a skill, right? So the lack of willingness of others around you, or the inability or the lack of interest in accessibility within the organization is one thing, but you are developing your own skills. And even if you will fail there at the organization you're currently at because they won't be keen to do this, you will take it elsewhere. So that's super important, okay? It's, you're not alone in this, and even though that would be the second thing I say, even though very often it might appear that you are the only person who cares, if you start talking about this with other folk and you start showing them how this works, even those tiny little things that you've learned or maybe you've observed from your users, somebody else will become interested. And accessibility scales up. It's like the force of mass. You basically, it's like a big, or at the beginning, tiny ball rolling downhill. Have you seen this movie from the 80s called Creatures? It was really cool, about like these aliens from space coming to eat people alive. Really cool stuff, right? And they were like tiny furball things with lots of teeth and everything. And so one tiny thing couldn't eat anyone because it was like a hamster, big ugly hamster. Like that thing is not gonna eat anyone, maybe bite their leg off or something. But in order to eat a person, they had to roll into that giant ball. So like there were scenes in the movie when they were like rolling these giant balls across, you know, villages and whatever. And then obviously whatever they would go through, they'd be just a skeleton left, yeah? And that's what it's like with accessibility as well. If you get that mass, if you get some other folks on board, there'll be two of you talking about this, right? And like in an organization, it's very easy to ignore one person. Everybody would be like, yeah, just stop, give me a break. I don't want to listen about this, right? I don't want to hear about this. But then there's two of you, you know, and two of you are starting to moan and kind of go like, hey, can we make this better? Can we make this work? And that's more annoying. So then there's another person joining you because they'd be like, oh, these two guys are like making some sense, let's do this together. And there's 3 of you, and when there's 5 of you or 10 of you, it's becoming really annoying. And they cannot let you all go because they need you. So they'll start listening to you. Of course, I'm joking partially, but what I'm trying to say is that the power of an individual, paradoxically, even if they are alone, actually lies in the community. In the community of colleagues, in the community of customers, in the community of people wanting to do the same thing. So my advice to anyone who wants to start that journey is obviously educate yourself, learn your WCAG, learn your technical stuff. You can do that rule that I recommend in the book, like 1 WCAG rule a day. Just that. Just read it and let it go, let it sink in. It's all difficult, but it can be learned. But it's to do with understanding that you can't do this alone, but the best part is you don't have to. There's always more people. I haven't seen really a single organization where I would go to work with, small or big, and there would be just one person saying, I'm interested in this, and nobody else is. It's never the case. There might be not too many people, but there's some. And when you start, as I said, you cannot lose. If it doesn't work in your organization, that group of people will carry it elsewhere, and they will basically stick that accessibility thing into other processes they will be involved in over the years. And this is how it grows. Accessibility grows quietly. It doesn't have to be loud. It's a quiet practice of you coming back to the technical roots of your professional practice, whatever it is, understanding your customers and connecting dots. And you can start this very, very slowly. And that is sort of independent it doesn't depend on the cultural context. I've seen it work everywhere, in Poland, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in the States. It's just to do with interested people doing stuff they believe in and scaling it up slowly. Just being a bit of a sneaky, being an agent of change. That's how it works.
Okay.
I would like to add something, okay?
Oh,
Is it okay?
Last chance.
Sorry. But I realized that I forgot one very, very important thing. Test your software with the people with special needs, with disabilities, because real users are the most important. They will give you actually the real feedback how it works for them, because formal accessibility is not enough, as we said. Sometimes WCAG is also not enough in the special case, so that's why it's very, very important to test it all the time.
Okay, I was about to say we have to wrap up, and each one of our speakers will have a chance to say his one final thought. I guess, David, that was your final thought.
Exactly.
Great. So, a final thought from David is test with actual users who need accessibility. Robert, do you have a final thought or case or interesting situation you'd like to share?
Yeah, from mine would be actually listen to people, whether in your organization or even before you start building product you're gonna test. I think it's also important to listen to people that has special needs before you build something, then test it in the end kind of. So I would say it's really listen to people, listen to your organization, and understand what opportunities and challenges they are specifically for you. Because you could also find the alliances for what you said, Wojtek. It's always happier, let's say, to bring change together with someone else and support each other.
Wojtek, final thought?
Sure. Don't be scared. Be curious. You're not alone, okay? These three things, and that can drive you forward. Thank you.